have spoken many, many times about my mother in this course. You've been mentioned and referenced many, many times, and I'm sure that people are wondering, who is this amazing woman? because I've mentioned you so many times that Mark actually laughs now when I reference you. So yeah, so Alice Portnoy of My Jewelry Wardrobe. Tell us a bit about your background, how you got into jewelry, what you were doing before. Over to you.
Okay. Well, jewelry is not my first career, right? I've had several careers in my life, starting off as a teacher, which I did for a number of years. And then when we moved to the UK, I thought I better do something else. And I took, when we lived in Beaconsfield, I took a ceramics course at the High Wycombe College, just because I had time to do something crafty. And I quite liked ceramics, but, you know, I did it as a sort of a hobby. And then in 1979, after we had been living in the UK for almost 5 years, I got a job. And I worked for domestic appliance company Neff, initially as their consumer affairs manager, and then setting up a program of home demonstrations throughout the country, where I traveled all around the UK. I eventually hired over 100 women who were, their job was to go into our customers' homes after they bought one of our ovens and demonstrate it, because it was a new concept in cooking with a fan, and the British public wasn't aware of how to use it. And that went on for 7 or 8 years. And then after that time, and we did away with that program because of money, et cetera, I became project manager. And then I went back to school and I did a degree in marketing, and I became marketing manager. Okay, so that takes me to my previous career. And I worked for that company for almost over 26 years. And I retired in 2005. And I decided that I needed to do something creative. So I went back to ceramics. And I went to Westminster Adult Education and I did ceramics classes. And I made lots of pots and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then I thought that really, if I was going to have a hobby, I wanted to have one that I could do at home, where I didn't have to go to a class all the time. And I knew I couldn't do ceramics at home because ceramics is a very messy thing. You need a kiln, you need the clay, you need the glazes. It takes up a lot of space. And I knew I couldn't do that. So I took a one-day jewelry taster class at Westminster Adult Education. And I thought, this is something interesting. It's using my hands, doing something I like, creative. And it's probably something that I could do at home because it doesn't take up that much space. So there started many courses. I then went to Westminster and I worked through what they call BTEC. I did BTEC level 1, BTEC level 2, and BTEC level 3, which is almost like a degree. It's not exactly a degree because it's on an adult education level. But if I was going to go on university after that, I would have to go to university and do another jewelry course in order to get a proper degree. And I really didn't want to do that because I thought I have done enough schooling and I'm really sick of it. So I thought I won't do that anymore. And I'll just do classes when and if I want them, really. And as it turned out, Westminster closed their adult education jewelry department. And so I started going to City Lit. And I've now been going to City Lit for about 6 years. And I do a workshop class where we're all more or less experienced people. And we just go in to use the big equipment. And we have a teacher there to supervise. And she gives us assistance if we need assistance. So that started my jewelry. I set up a little workshop at home with most of the basic tools that I need. And I started making things and I started trying to sell the things that I made. And I did that via craft fairs. And I thought that's probably the best route for me. And I did quite a number of craft fairs, both in Hampstead. I did Canary Wharf, a big craft fair there. I did another one in Marylebone. And it was my way to sell my things to people. And I like that route because I like to explain to people how I go about making my jewelry. And it's a face-to-face, you can react with people. So when I do a craft fair, I always stand in front of my table rather than behind my table. Of course, with social distancing, it's a little more difficult now, but I used to stand in front of my table. And when people would come, I would, even if they weren't really particularly interested in jewelry, I'd always try to engage them in conversation and also explain to them the processes that I use. Like I use gold and silver together, and I distress my silver until it starts to melt. And these are various methods of making textures on silver and different materials. So I always try to explain to people. And so I find that's a way to sell my things, a more personal way to sell my things. I have a website, and I'm always adding things to my website. I don't find it very successful in terms of selling because it's too impersonal. People can look at the website, but it's too remote. I think it's too remote. Anyway, it's remote for people who are going to spend £100 or £150 on a necklace. It might be okay for someone who's going to spend £10 on a pair of earrings, but not so much for more expensive things. So that's how it's progressed. And I've been doing it now for almost 10 years, well, just about 10 years. And I make things at home all the time. And when I have an opportunity, I go to craft fairs and try to sell them. And then I have some people that actually have bought things from me that will call me and say they're looking for something. Do I have it? I have one customer that lives near Hampstead Heath. She's quite elderly and she's disabled. So whenever she needs anything, I go to her home. And I guess there's not too many people, professional people that would do that, And her husband will phone me and say, Sylvia has an event to go to and she's looking for a necklace. And I'll say, well, I'll come over and we can try some things on. So, that's a service that I can give that a lot of other people probably wouldn't be interested. So those are customers that will call me when they need something, which is very nice. And that's how I built up my business, really. Yeah.
So how much, it's funny because going back to what you said earlier about when you first started working for Neff,
yeah,
and you were dealing with customers in their home, and dealing directly face-to-face with customers, how much do you think that informs how you approach business now? Because it seems quite similar, even though obviously they're very, very different. I hear you say that the website doesn't work very well, but clearly there are lots of people that do sell jewelry on websites.
Yes,
so how much do you think that your previous career in marketing and understanding about the importance of face-to-face customer relations, because we have loads of people that have gone to startup school that are absolutely frightened to death of speaking to people because it's scary.
Yeah, I did a craft fair with a woman who was a student on the same class, and we shared a table. And she said to me, and while we were doing this, she said, I don't know how you do it. How do you manage to just talk to people just like this? How do you manage to do that? I said, well, it has to do with my background, of course. Firstly, being a teacher. Being a teacher, you have to stand in front of a classroom and you have to talk to total strangers and you have to relate to them. You have to form some kind of relationship. So that's number one, okay? Number two is marketing. I used to have to stand up in front of our sales force and tell them of what was happening. I was one woman in front of 30 men, and they would give me hassle. They would try to tease the life out of me, and they would try to say things that just to get me off course, because that's what they did, right? And I would have to cope with that, and I would have to, deal with that kind of thing, which I did very well. And I think you're right. I went to people's homes, strangers, and I would have to explain to them in language. Don't forget, these were people in all walks of life. No preconceived ideas about where they lived or what kind of income they had or what their background was or whether they were educated or not educated. And the information had to be presented to them in a way that they could understand it. And this had to be modified depending on who I was talking to or who the person I was training was talking to. And it was always the way to try to find out how you can reach that person. What is the route to getting that person to understand? Is it purely demonstrating, you standing in front and showing them? Or is it more than that? Is it having them do something? Is it explaining to them and then asking them to do it, to make sure that they understood? So it was always trying to find the route to that person's understanding of something. And I think what you said is years of experience in marketing and consumer affairs and dealing with customers and everything else has formed the way I relate to people. And so years and years of that. And it's very difficult if that's not part of your personality to teach people to do that. Because like Leslie said to me, she said she's frightened stiff. She goes to a fair and she's absolutely terrified of talking to people. And I said, that's difficult. That's really, you have to get over that, because part of your selling, being able to sell, is being able to talk to people. And if you can't, you've got a big problem, and you've got to find a way. And you can, of course, train people. You can help them like you're doing, I'm sure, in your program, to get over that. That just to find the one link, maybe, the opening sentence, whatever that sentence may be, whether it's a rehearsed sentence or not a rehearsed sentence, to give you the entry into being able to talk to that person. I mean, something as stupid as talking about the British weather. When somebody passes by and say, "Oh my God, how did you manage to go out on a day like today?" So something simple like that will get the first link between you and that person. So it's finding that link, really. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And what would you say has been the biggest challenges for you just getting started in terms of the business side of it? What have been the big challenges?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges, and I think anyone who sells anything, is to find the right market. Okay? Because I know that my things appeal to a certain type of person. There's no point in trying to sell things to someone who's 20 years old. Yeah, because basically they're not really interested in my jewelry. So I have to find the market for the things that I make. And my experience tells me, you only learn this really by experience. From the people that I have sold to, the people that will stop at my stand and look at things are usually of a certain age. And so I am designing, whether I know it or not, I'm designing in my own mind things for people in that age bracket who I know will be interested. Classic things, classic designs, things that are based maybe on Art Deco designs, 1930s. You have to like that period or don't like it, but I like it. So things that I make tend to, if you put it in a category, you'd say, that looks like an Art Deco. That would come up from that period. So you have to like the look. But I design the things that I like to look at. And hopefully I'm appealing to people who like similar kind of thing. So whatever you're selling, you have to find your market, right? I mean, if you're selling sports equipment and tank tops and stretchy things, there's no point in advertising to someone who never goes to a gym or someone who doesn't exercise, that kind of thing. So you've got to look at your product. What is your product? And then who do you want to sell to? And then focus your marketing on that level. Don't waste your time with people who are never going to want your things, because that's really a waste of time.
And did you find that group of people mainly through discovering that the people that were going to the craft fairs and were buying from you tended to be the same group of people? Or alternatively, did you, it's kind of chicken and egg, isn't it? Did you go to did you, because of where you live and the craft fairs that you attend, do they attract a certain type of person that therefore then means that you are selling to those people?
If you think of Hampstead Community Center, okay, it's right on the middle of the high street, right? And people are walking by there all the time. Teenagers, older people who go for a walk on a Saturday or Sunday. I mean, that's one area where there's an eclectic, very eclectic. I think you would agree with that. There's all ages there. Now, the younger people come into the market and they walk through. You know, they tend to sort of walk through. They very rarely buy anything because there's scented soaps, there's scarves. Sometimes they buy scarves. There's things that maybe appeal to people who have children. There's hand-knitted things for kids. There's some prints. There's some cutting boards. There's things, if you have a kitchen and family, if you're 18, 19, 20 years old, you're probably not interested in those things. You know, you're not living in your own flat. You might be living with your parents or whatever, or you're still in school. So you're not looking at that stuff, all right? So the people that stop and look tend to be married couples with children, right? Who are buying things for their kitchen or for their home or whatever. And older people, or I won't say old people, but middle-aged people who are out for a stroll with their husband on a Sunday. Maybe they went for Sunday lunch somewhere and they're just stopping in afterwards. So the people that have stopped and bought things from me in the past tend to be in the middle to older age group. I have had younger one. I'll give you a little story. So I sell these necklaces that are made with rubber, and you've probably seen them. Rubber necklaces with silver discs on them that slide, all right? So you can move the pieces around. They're quite trendy, I think. You know, they're really nice. So when the first time I ever had one on the table, a very young woman came and she bought one of the necklaces, right? And she said she was probably 25. She said, my mother is going to love this, right? She didn't buy it for herself. She said, my mother is going to love this. She used to be one of the jewelry directors at the V&A. And she's going to love this. Now, that's really something. I mean, I thought, well, if this girl is buying it for her mother, who worked at the V&A, the mother is probably 50, right? Give or take, right? So she thinks it's design focused enough that her mother would love it. That's wonderful. So within my collection, I have things that would appeal to a younger person, like the rubber and silver, certainly. But the majority of things, the necklaces, things like this, like I'm wearing, the big beaded things, tend to be 50, 55, 60, that kind of age group. Yeah.
And when you got started, what aside from the courses, obviously you did a bunch of training, but then there was setup costs like tools, equipment, your workshop, etc. When you're starting out, what do you think you would have spent, just aside from the training, in just setting up your basic workshop?
Okay. Well, the basic layout of the workshop was easy because I didn't have to buy a workbench, because we bought this unit that is a study bed. So it has a bed in the wall that folds away, and then it has a desktop, right? So all we did was we cut out the center circle, and I bought a leather piece that goes underneath it that catches the thing. So that was an enormous saving because we already had the furniture, basically. I had the wardrobe where I could store all my tools. I had my file cabinet that came with it where I could store all my papers and all my other tools. So in terms of initial furniture, it was a big saving. All right. So then I had started to accumulate tools when I started doing my jewelry classes. So each year at Christmas or whatever, I would ask the family to buy me some tools, hammers or files or things. So I didn't need that much when I actually set it up, because I already, over the 10 years that I had been making jewelry, each year I would buy myself a couple of tools. And don't forget, I was going to class. So most of the work I was doing was in class. And all the files and all the torches and everything else was already in class. So I didn't have to buy big tools, big equipment. I would think that the stuff that I've accumulated over the years that I have and use, I'm going to give it a figure of 2,000 pounds, probably, for everything that I have. But it's not been purchased all at one time. So it's not a big, if you amortize that over 5 or 6 years, it's not that much, really. And each year every time I go to the shop, I'll buy emery paper, or I'll buy a couple of other cleaning things or something, like little bits and pieces. But I have enough now in my workshop to do most of the things that I wanted to do. For my torch, I use a catering can. So you can buy a top that screws onto the people that the chefs use to flambe.
Yeah.
So I don't have a big expensive torch with a big canister of gas. I use this little flambe thing, which is perfectly adequate, really. And then I have a little hand torch, which is only about this big, which costs about 30 pounds. So I manage. And then my files and not that much, really. Nothing.
And would you say that when you, one of the other big challenges, and we had a jeweler in one of our cohorts last year, is around pricing, because obviously when you go to these craft fairs, there's often quite a number of jewelers, and the pricing, it seems to me, varies enormously. And you can get people at local jewelry fairs selling things for hundreds of pounds, and then people selling things for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds. How have you arrived at your pricing over the years?
This is a real challenge. And in fact, I did a weekend course, not last summer or the summer before, with my teacher, where you go in and there's actually a form, okay? And you put down everything on that form. You put down all your tools that you used to make something. You put down the cost of your material, your metal, all right? And then you put down the number of hours that you worked on it. So there's a formula, actually. So you come up, in theory, I should be charging my time at 20 pounds an hour, okay? In theory, all right? But I don't sit down for a straight time to do anything. In other words, maybe a professional jeweler goes into their workshop in the morning and they're there all day. They sit down and they work 5, 6, 7 hours on something. I'll go in and I'll sit down for half an hour, an hour. Then I'll do something else. Then I'll come back. Now, in my workshop, I have a whiteboard. And in theory, every time I sit down, go into the workshop, I should put in the time and when I stopped, all right? So I should be charging, if something has taken me 3 hours, that's 60 pounds in labor, all right? The cost of material was maybe 20 pounds, 20, 40, 60, 80. So that's 80 pounds for just the time and the material. In theory, a professional jeweler would double that. So that piece of jewelry would cost 160 pounds, okay? Now, I could do that, but I probably wouldn't sell anything, because I think that as someone who doesn't have a professional workshop where I'm paying rent, okay, that a lot of jewelers have to pay rent on their workshop and overhead costs and all of that, that I can afford not to do that. Some things take me very little time, and I can charge quite a bit for them. Other things take me more time, but if I charged what I should charge for them, they would be way too expensive. I have some things that I refuse to lower the price. I refuse. I have two necklaces that are all riveted pieces, and they're 250 pounds, and I will never take anything less than that because I know the amount of time. The materials are not so expensive, really, minimal, but the time that it took me to make it is astronomical. Probably more than 8 hours, much more than 8 hours. So I couldn't. But other things I can afford to charge less because the amount of time it took me was minimal and the amount of material was minimal. I have, for instance, the loopy necklaces that I make. One looks like a pear shape, which is quite pretty. The material on that was maybe 10 pounds. All right. The amount of time that it took me was maybe an hour. Okay. I bought the chain. Now I can sell that for 80 pounds and make a really good profit. Really good profit because it hardly cost me anything.
Yeah.
So I balance off the things that I can sell at a reasonable price because they took me less time and less material with the things that I have to charge more for because it took me more time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, at the last craft fair, there was a guy there who saw a necklace that you made, the one with lots of chains that took you all that time. I know it took you all that time. And he said, how much is that? And I think I said it was 200 pounds or something. And he said, way too cheap. He said, I sell that for over 300 pounds. He said, that's way too cheap.
Yeah.
Because, but yeah, look, it's to a certain extent, it's about reaching that ideal price point where you know that you're going to be able to sell and people are going to be able to buy and you're going to be able to cover your costs and you're not going to make a loss. And, as you said, you don't have your overheads, you don't have the rent, you don't have to, all of that stuff that other people might have to pay, but all of that does have to, which in a sense is it's what makes selling jewelry, I suppose, challenging because the same amount of materials, the same amount of time can yield two completely different price points depending on whether you've had to pay rent or you haven't had to pay rent or you've had to, so it does vary enormously.
There's a lot of very cheap jewelry out there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff that's made in India. There's a lot of stuff that's made in Mexico, and it's very cheap. And there are earrings, silver earrings for 10 pounds or 15 pounds. I know. And when I talk to people, what I try to explain is when they buy something from me, they are buying a one-off. They will not see it on anyone else. And this is an advantage. Either you buy into that concept of uniqueness or you don't. If that's not important to you, then go ahead and buy the 10-pound necklace or 10-pound earring. That's not my market. I want people to buy from me because they think they're wearing something that other people won't have. And someone will say, where did you get that? And very rarely do I duplicate. I mean, I do occasionally make something again because I know it sells really well. So I will make it again, but not that often. And most of my pieces, that's it. I mean, especially the riveted ones. I'll never make that again because it was too complicated. On the other hand, linky chains, that one that I have that's very long. It's just linked together and it's very long. I made that once. I sold it in about 2 minutes at a craft fair. So I made it again because it's very easy to make. It's 150 pounds if somebody wants it. It's very profitable and it's very nice. And people like it. And the woman who bought it for me was actually quite young. She must have been, I would say, in her 40s. So it appealed, that attracts a younger audience. So I'll make it again. But other things that I won't. So you either want that or you don't want it. And that's why talking to people is so important, because you can explain to them, about the fact that this is unique.
So that brings me to COVID. And
that's a
clearly, people like yourself that rely on that face-to-face customer interaction and depend on it.
Yeah.
How has COVID impacted on your business? And were there anything that you did during COVID that you wouldn't have done otherwise?
Well, of course, I did have 2 craft fairs. You did the one for me, which was reasonably successful, I thought, considering. And I did do one in October before the lockdown, which was okay as well. So the autumn hasn't been too disastrous. It certainly covered the cost of my materials, things that I've been making over the last couple of months. I was supposed to do right before Christmas, which of course didn't happen. I've made a couple of things at home just to keep me busy. I made a bracelet, another bracelet. I haven't tried to do any selling. I've been updating my website. I've been taking pictures and putting them on Facebook, my Facebook shop. So I've been using it sort of as a time to do some of the nitty gritty things that I don't necessarily like to do. Painting my workbench, sorting out all my jewelry, or reorganizing things, tidying up. In terms of selling, no, not really. So I haven't done anything. And I'm hoping that maybe if we get out of lockdown, I had paid for 2 craft fairs in Hampstead. So I told the organizer to just keep my money. So the first craft fair that we have, I'll be there. But when that's going to be, I don't know. If we open up at the end of January, then I imagine that he'll have one at the end of January and I will be there. So, and that's how people are so hungry to buy things at that time.
Well, we hope they still have money to buy things. That's what we're hoping, right?
Well, don't forget, a lot of people haven't been spending money on theater and restaurants. There's an article in the Times this morning. They say they expect restaurants to boom in 2021 because people are so starved to go out to eat that I think they will. And I think people will spend money if they, if they have it, obviously.
They have it. So I'm going to end with just asking you, if you were starting out as a jeweler, what would you say are the let's do 5 essential things that you need to know?
Okay, all right. Well, know your market, know who you're trying to sell to, calculate your pricing, think carefully about how much you should charge for your things. Look at outlets. Where can you sell your jewelry? That's really important. I know that I could probably sell my jewelry through certain select shops. The difficulty with that is that the shop has to consider their overheads and their profits and everything else. So I remember a couple of years ago, I went into a shop in St. John's Wood, Celia Coleman, which has very nice things. And they were very interested in my jewelry. And they said, yes, we'll have it. And then she said, how much do you want for this piece? I said, well, I need about 60 pounds. And she said, oh, couldn't give you that. She said, because we have to take our pricing and then add that and everything else. So I thought, no, I can't sell that way because I'm not going to make any money.
Yeah.
And just to, that's no good. So you think of your marketplace, where you're going to sell, your pricing. Also think of your product. I mean, how can you make your product you? How can you signature it to make it uniquely your own style? That's 4. And 5, maybe think about time. How much time do you have? Is this going to be your full-time profession? Or are you going to fit it in and do something else at the same time? So I think those probably 5 things are pretty important.
No, I agree. And I think going back to time as well, it sort of comes back to the whole idea about whether you produce those one-off pieces or whether you're going to be a manufacturer, right? And then if you were, you probably wouldn't do those one-off signature pieces. You would do something where you said, okay, if I want this to be my full-time business, I'm going to figure out ways to replicate this and maybe even...
Well, you can do that very easily, because if you make something, I did a necklace which I had cast. We were away and I went to an exhibition and they had jewelry from the late 1900s. And I saw this necklace, you'll remember it. It's like long pieces of silver with little links that hold it together. That is actually an early 19th century design. And they had it in gold. And I really liked it. And so I thought, I can do that, but I don't want to make all those pieces. So I made one. And then I took it to a caster, and he makes a mold. And he casts it. And he duplicated all these pieces with the rings. And then I just barely put it together. I had to smooth it. And I made earrings once for someone. And I took her earring. She wanted exactly her earring. And I thought, I can't do this. So I took her earring. She only had one. And I had it cast. So you could make something and then you could have it cast. And they make a mold and you make hundreds of the same thing, right? So you can decide to do that. That's absolutely fine. And a lot of pieces that you see at craft fairs are cast.
Yeah.
And there's one woman that makes these rings that look like they have stripes on them. She makes one, she has a cast. Or she makes it out of wax and she has a cast. So you can decide to do that. You can do a range of earrings, for example. And you can have them all cast and then just polish them and put them out and sell them that way. So yeah, not a problem. You can mass produce easily if you want to do that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Alice Portnoy of My Jewelry Wardrobe, for sharing your story with us.
Hopefully it's helpful to people who want to start out in a business as a hobby or as a full-time profession. Who knows?
Yeah, no, lots of really good points. Thank you very much.
Okay, hon. Take care. Have a good day.
Thanks.